Well, welcome to our next episode of Talking with Tressa. I'm so glad that you're here. And I have to tell you that this is a new thing for me. I mean, I used to do this 39 years ago on a cable network, and I didn't have a production crew in another province. I didn't have some friends around me making sure that things run smoothly in our little studio. But I do today, and I just want to have a shout out to them and say thanks for being here. Thank you for helping me. And if you're stopping by, scrolling on your phone, and you're thinking, what on earth is this? Let me just say this. My heart is that if you stick around for a few minutes between words that I may say, but more importantly, that my guest says, I pray that you're encouraged, that you're blessed, that you are inspired, and maybe you're open to what it is to have God help you with your life. I can personally say that without Christ in my life, the things that I've been through, whether I did them myself or circumstances around me were created, God has been my anchor. Now, was I always like that? Definitely not. My story is one that involves many negatives in the midst of some positives. But ultimately, what I can tell you is that the difference that Christ has made in my life and my journey so far, just celebrating my 61st birthday, actually a couple of days ago from today's show, I just know that it made all the difference in the world. And so my hope is that you will know that God can help you as well. So Talking with Tressa is designed especially to give others a platform to bring their ministries to light. There's something about being a bridge between people who are maybe doing something over here and someone on the other side doesn't realize it. And so if there's a way in which we can bridge that gap, and it maybe is something just as simple as a little talk show, then that is what our heart desire is. And so I am hoping, like I've said, is that you will be not only encouraged, but inspired to trust God with every detail. Now, today's guest is someone that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But before I get to that, I always like to tell a story or even maybe why we tell stories. And so today, what I want to say is, why do you tell stories? Do you tell them because you just want to complain? Do you tell them because you want to hopefully inspire someone to maybe do something similar? Do you tell stories to just simply share and get it off your heart? I don't know about your why, but I know a lot of times I love to tell the details because I know that God, He is found in the details. Our world is so fast right now that most of the time people don't want to take time to actually listen to the details. But I believe that the details prove that God is real, that His hand is not just the hand of God. It's not even just the fingerprint of God, but it's actually every line of that fingerprint that proves that God is at work. My guest today is someone that, when I really think about it, he was brought into my life at such a time as this to help me have the courage to believe that even though I've just celebrated my 61st birthday, that God is not finished with me yet, that my age does not define me. You see, a lot of you that know me know that I work as a professional model. I've been doing that since I was 16. And we all know that there's a season for that, even with airbrushing once in a while. But the reality is God is never, ever done with you. You can be breathing at 99 and minister to someone in a hospital bed beside you. You might even be the patient that's there, and maybe you've broken your hip or whatever the situation is, and you think, okay, God, now what am I supposed to do? Maybe you're only 70. But the reality is God is not finished with you or me. And if we have breath, we have a purpose. Now, I don't want to talk too much about my guest, except to say I'm excited that he's here. And I know that despite being a new friend, probably newer than his wife, because I actually met his wife, Leslie, in, I guess it was June of 2023, that I only met Mark Callaway, and that's who my guest is today, just a few weeks ago. But the moment that I met him, I saw a warmth in his face. I was drawn to that. Now, I wasn't surprised because Leslie's wonderful, and any of you who watched our launch show, then you have already met her. So I kind of expected that she married a good guy or vice versa, right? But when I had an opportunity to interact with him as he drove me to the airport heading back to Canada, I had an opportunity to really talk and hear his heart. And even watching him and listening to him preach, I got inside of the way he thinks a little bit. And so as I get to know him, like you guys are, having the opportunity to do so, once again, I hope you're encouraged and know that God is real and he is not done with you yet. So I'm not going to tell you too much about Mark, but I will say that he lives in California. He, of course, did not live there always, or not, of course, but he didn't. But prior to that, he was a pastor and in the Indiana and Ohio area. And you know what, truth is, I want to stop talking and just bring him on the show. So, Mark, I just hope that you are going to be happy that you're here, because I know that you've got a busy life. But I'm thrilled that you are. And little did we know, as we drove on that crazy California highway, I think I was in and out of, I was pretty tired, but I was like, I got to wake up. I got to listen to this guy. I just love him. And here you are for everyone to meet. So welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, thank you. It is my honor to join you on your broadcast today. I'm so excited.
Oh, I'm so glad. So when I first heard you speak, I was, again, the warmth in the church was wonderful, and I don't remember all the details of the message, but I do know that you did ask people to come forward for prayer, and I felt a little bit embarrassed to do it, not because I'm embarrassed to go forward for prayer, but I mean, I had just gotten there. It was my first time being in your church, but I felt so strong that I just couldn't, I couldn't not. And you spoke words of encouragement, blessing, and I really felt that God used you that night to tell me I was on the right path. And something that you don't know is that years ago at a conference that I produced, I had given women a letter that was supposedly God writing to them. Someone sent it to me 20 some years ago when I was working on air at the radio station. And I have copied it and given it out to people multiple times, but I've never seen it actually printed and given to me. But it was on your welcome table. So I don't know if y'all can see. And it's the Father's love letter. Well, as I was sitting there and you were still continuing to preach, and I was concentrating, but I also was pretty mesmerized by this. I thought, oh my goodness, this is that letter. And God used that night, Mark, to remind me of not only my purpose through words that you spoke, but his love for me. And it was very, very, very precious. So I'm grateful that you had it on that little table. I went to get a pen because I like to collect pens. I have a lot of pens. But instead of just a pen, I received this. So anyway, thank you for that. And now I want you to tell me about your book, and maybe our crew can put your book up on the screen so that people can start Googling it, as we say. It's called It's Not Too Late. And if you look at the small print at 50, 60, and beyond, you can begin to pursue your dream. And Mark, I want you to tell me a couple of things that maybe inspired you initially to do this book, and just take us on the journey. This is your time. I can talk, but I don't want to talk the whole time. I want you to share your heart, what the Holy Spirit's put on your heart to share, and tell me more about the book and what inspired you to write it.
All right. Well, it began actually when my wife and I were pastoring in Northwest Indiana near Chicago. I not only was pastoring, I was also an attorney, and I was also doing some modeling of my own at that time. And we'd been there about 18 years. And quite frankly, we had talked over and over for about 13, 14 years of moving out to California. But you can talk about stuff until finally you decide it was just a passing fancy, not actually an intention. And one night we were on a bit of a holiday up in Holland, Michigan. We were in the lobby of the hotel there, getting ready to go to dinner. And my wife looked at me and she said, "You've done a lot of things in your life." But she said, "But you've never really taken a bold step." And after I dug the salt out of the wound on that one, I began
Those
to
wives,
realize that, yes, there was that moment. And while we were at dinner that night, I said, "Well, that's it. We're going to stop talking about California and we're going to actually take the steps
Mm,
to get there."
wow.
Because we had talked for quite a while about starting a church in the Los Angeles area.
Okay.
And in fact, where we had talked about doing it, which was in the San Fernando Valley, we had been told that that was one of the most difficult places. In fact, they said they'd never had a successful church plant in the area that we were talking about, which my first inclination was to say, well, that's why I've arrived, because if you've never had one, then it's good that I'm here. I'm not sure if that was arrogance or just something that might have been mildly prophetic, but we took the steps at that point. Well, it took about a year and a half to shut down my law office, and over a period of time, it was tough saying goodbye because we'd been at that church for 20 years, and in a town in northern Indiana, northwest Indiana, and it was a very difficult thing because we had become like father and mother to a
Mm,
lot of the people there. And when we took that step, we knew we were taking every bit of security. I had contracts with
mm,
county governments as well as the church there, and we literally took everything and put it aside for the opportunity to go to California. And just prior to when we were in the final stages of that, I had met a publisher at a hotel lobby, and he was he was a very, very interesting guy. We just started talking, which my wife is not shocked that I say that frequently.
yeah.
Frequently, when we would be places, she'd say, "You're a few minutes late." I said, "Yeah, I started talking to somebody, and
Mm.
we just got into strange conversations." And so she is used to that type of thing. And I met Raymond Aaron. He was part of the Chicken Soup series. He had written two of the books. He wrote Chicken Soup for the Parent Soul and Chicken Soup for the Canadian
Really?
Soul.
The
Yes, and I
Canadian.
asked him, I
Wow.
said,
Okay.
yeah, I asked him, I said, all right, I've got to ask, what is Chicken Soup for the Canadian Soul?
Yeah, I'd like
And
to
he
know
said,
myself. I
well,
didn't even know they had it.
yeah, he said, well, we Canadians know all about you Americans, but you Americans know nothing about we Canadians. I said, well, that's true. I said, everything I know I can say in 40 seconds. I said, I know that you live in cold weather, you like hockey, and half of you speak French. That's as much as I know. I don't know anything else. And so I've got to read your
Oh,
book. And but
wow.
we started talking, and he actually ended up writing. He not only published it, but he wrote the introduction of it. And
Wow.
he mentioned how we met in the lobby, and he said, right after we started talking about this book because I just had the idea in my head. And he said quickly he knew that the book needed to be written.
Hmm.
And he said after a few more minutes, he knew that I was the one that needed to write the book.
Wow. I love
And
it.
so, and so our relationship began that day, and
Yeah.
it was a wonderful journey to have that published.
Mm. Doesn't that just prove once again, it's the providential meetings, it's the orchestration of God taking you on a path. And what does the word say? Trust the Lord with all your heart, don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him. And what is He going to do? Direct your path. So that day when you were going right and He was going left, and who knows the timing, what made Him where it was, there's nothing that happens when you love the Lord and you've surrendered your life to him and you want to follow his way, that he will not make happen by crossing of paths. It's like with Leslie. I'm at NRB and I could have gone right or left, but when I did, and I came up to her booth, and those of you that are watching that didn't watch last week, the NRB is the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. And I just want to go here real quick, if I may, because I see so clearly that God also knew that on that day when I ran into this lovely blonde who was just so vivacious and shared about hospitality, and of course that made my ears ring. And I love anybody that can confirm it's okay to have more than one set of dishes, not to mention about 10 different, centerpiece ideas. So thank you to Leslie. But God knew that she was connected to a man that has written a book that would be perfect for me right now when I'm thinking, I am a grandmother of 3 and I've had a wonderful career and I continue to do things. But when I think about that, God has a plan and a purpose, and I dream. When I think about even the titles or the chapters that you have in the book, there's a few that have stood out to me. And so just back to the path crossings that we're talking about, you just have to trust God. And so when I think about your book, he knew it needed to be written for someone like me. So thank you for laboring and having to go through the whole process to make this book. I did tickle, or I laughed at the color of the book. See, it's bright enough that those of us that need reading glasses, we can see it. And it's not too late. If it would have been small, I might have missed it, where I was thinking, it's not too late is such a powerful title, because no matter what the situation is, and maybe it isn't necessarily an age thing. It could be that you thought you missed the opportunity of something, but God is never early and he is never late if you trust him. All right. So I'm so glad. And what was his name again? And I do apologize. I didn't register it when you said it. That helped you.
Raymond, Raymond Aaron,
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to
who's
look him up and tell
he's
him
my
thank you.
publisher,
All right. So
and
I'm going to
he's
have
a
to tell him
tremendous
thank you.
guy.
Oh, that's so
Yeah,
awesome. So can we go ahead?
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but no, please. This is how this show works, right? We're not scripted. We just go with
Okay,
it. So I want you to finish your thought, and
sure.
then I'll get into this part. So yes,
Well, I ran into just in the course of writing the book, I ran into so many great stories, and I thought fascinating when you talked about stories. Stories connect us.
yes,
Instructions are sterile and most of the time ignored, but a story connects us with each other and
yeah.
with a principle. And one of the great stories I found in this book, in the writing of this book, was a gentleman he had always dreamed of writing a book. At 91, he finally wrote his first book.
Come
At
on.
95, at 95, he'd written 6 of them.
Oh,
And so I always,
okay, mic
I
drop
think
right there. Wow,
I
wow.
think of my uncle who he had been a missionary. He'd pastored great churches. And at age 80, I was sitting down with him to dinner one night, and he was explaining how now he was in seminary. He had never gone to seminary. He had gone out in the
Mm.
40s and began to preach, and was people loved him. He was a guy who you were just drawn to. And I said, Uncle, you've done all these things. Why are you in seminary at age 80? And he said, because I have so much more life to live, and I'm sure I won't be able to do it with just the preparation that I have from the past. He says, I've got to stay fresh.
That is amazing. That that is powerful. And again, it just makes me think back to so many people, like even Kay Arthur, which I know you know who Kay Arthur is. She is
Oh
still,
yeah.
she's still preaching, really late into her years. Of course, she's still around and she's still doing things. But when I first was introduced to her, she would have been in her 60s. And when I did the math on that, it made me realize people don't do necessarily certain things when they're younger. They don't have the years of experience. They don't have the stories in which give it context and maybe more examples than just one scenario. And so age creates a different garden of interaction with situations that God can use to solidify that, yes, in fact, he is real. His ways are true and right, because we have to sometimes repeat lessons of even just his faithfulness. So do you mind if I just go to your table of contents? Because I want to start with, I still have a dream. I mean, the story of your uncle is very much like that. He wanted to do something and he learned more. And then, any other stories that come into your mind, or even what made you start with that particular chapter as the first one?
That was my point of connection. Was I believe that everybody has a dream, and some are living theirs. But I find for many people, they had something that was in their heart. Maybe it was in their teens or 20s. Maybe it was something that began to develop in their 30s and 40s. And it can seem like just something that, a young man's or a young woman's fancy. But I just want to let people know that, something, at whatever age you can begin. And just simply because you're 50 or beyond doesn't mean that you're locked into your past. I
Mm.
was a bit of an athlete, and the one thing I learned was that you could mess up. If in basketball you could mess up for the first 3 quarters, but it was the fourth quarter of the game that determined who won and lost.
Oh, that's
You could
good.
be behind for the
Right.
first 3 quarters. You could make a lot of mistakes, but if you turn it on in the fourth quarter, you win the ball game. And
Mm.
that became really a vital part of my understanding of writing the book. But
I love
just
it.
simply because you're in the fourth quarter doesn't mean that the game is over. It means that this is the time to really turn it on.
Mm. And just as you're saying that, what comes to mind is what we love it with our Winnipeg Jets, which is, I'm situated middle of Canada, is when the game is tied and we get to go in overtime, it's like, oh, we get one more chance. And I almost feel like this is like the overtime. I don't know how many days and years I have left. I have no idea. But I do know that I want to finish well. And so, in a way, it's sort of the same thing, but yet a little different. Now, what about, I love chapter 3. It talks about excuses are the thieves in the house. What a great title. And just, again, maybe give me a couple of examples of things that you would think we often use as excuses. I know mine.
I,
I have a whole list.
it's funny. That is my favorite chapter in the
Is
book.
it?
It's also,
Okay.
yeah, it's also my longest chapter because this is where this is where you're either going to blow off your dream and really take, because I believe dreams are God given.
Mm,
And these are the moments that you either accept the challenge from God or you move on. And some of these,
mm.
one of the basic ones is, what if I fail? What
Yes,
if I
true.
and I used to when I practiced law, the one thing I would deal with all the time would be people would be saying, well, I'd be explaining a strategy or explaining what we were going to do, and they'd say, well, what if this happens? Well, what if that happens? And they always thought in terms of, what if this bad thing happens? Well, what if that bad thing happens? And the first thing I would say is, you can what if yourself right out of any good plan. But let's
Yeah.
take it from the other direction. What if things go right?
Right.
You know,
That's good.
we call something a stoplight, but it's green as much as it is red. We can just as easily call it a go light. And when you look at, in fact, I happen to believe that age is not your disadvantage. Age is your advantage, because
Yes.
you are not coming in as a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old where you have energy and strength but no background. Now you
Right.
have an amazing amount of experience that can either work for you or against you. At
Mm-hmm.
first, with Moses, it worked against him because he thought in terms of all of the failure of his life and questioned, why would these people even listen to me? Why would Pharaoh even listen to me? And it was very interesting. God had one simple statement: I'll be with you.
Right.
With
So good.
that answered the question. You know,
Mm.
what do I, who do I tell them sent me? Tell them I am sent
Mm-hmm.
you. The God of
Mm.
now. And
So good.
when we introduce now into our lives, not
Hmm.
someday, because someday we know what someday is. Someday is code for never.
So
When people say,
true.
well,
Yes.
someday I'm going to do this, no, you're not. You know why?
No.
Because the only thing we have is now. The past is gone. It doesn't matter whether it was good or bad, it's gone. The future is out there somewhere, but now is the one possession we have.
Hmm.
And what we do now determines our future. We can either go by everything we've done in the past, which is the easier route to go.
Sure.
But the basic understanding that I've come to over the years is that if all you want is what you have, then keep doing what you're doing. But if you want more,
Totally.
and God made us for more, He said, "Go out, be fruitful and multiply." And I even love where it says in Genesis that God was amazed. Yeah, you can put it in those. God was amazed when He looked at the people and said that that there is no limit to what they can do. When they were building this tower into the heavens, He said, "There's no limit to what they can do."
Mm.
Or I
Mm.
love where it says where it talks of Jacob, and it says that in the course of that night where he wrestled with the angel, he wrestled with God. At
Hmm.
the end of the night, he earned God's respect. And I
Mm.
believe that people who are willing to take a step forward and say, something, at the word as the words the final few sentences of the last battle, the great final book of the Chronicles of Narnia, where it says
Yes.
their
Right.
lives up to that point were just the cover and the title page of the great story.
So
And
good.
I love that whether you're 50, whether you're 60, whether you're 70, take it down
Right.
to 40, whatever it is,
Sure. Any age.
up till this
Yeah.
point, yeah, up to this
Any
point,
age.
your life has been the cover and title page of the real story, the great story that is yet to be told.
And I would really challenge a lot of the viewers to not think this book is for them, because I think back to when I was 30, in my earlier years when I was little, 12, 13, and I heard someone was 35, I thought that's old. Well, I'm going to tell all of you 35-year-olds, when you are 61, you are going to feel like you're 25. You might not be able to run as fast or stay down with your grandchildren on the floor as long as, you might have at 25, but you don't feel old. And the reality is all of your chapters, from what I can see, apply to any age, because even when you're younger, you can say, well, I don't have the right education. I don't have this. I've been a broadcaster for 30 years off and on. I've not had a day's professional training, even my other career, but God gave me enough to be able to get a start. And then I learned along the way whatever I needed to learn. I would say that it's so similar to this, that God can use you if you just are saying yes, and then teach me what I need to do. And the other thought that I had too, as you were talking, was how important it is to put that faith over the fear and of the failure and of even, well, what's your why? Why do you have to do it? Why do you think, I mean, let's be real, there's a lot of talk shows and everyone's online. But I also know that my sphere of either influence or connections are mine. And they will be from my perspective. And I'm not pretending to be a pastor. I have my own journey. I mean, that my past involves things that I will be very transparent about, not today just simply because of the show content, but I know that God has taken someone who did not trust him, who did not think I would be worthy of the life that he has given me since I surrendered my life and became real. And so when you talk about the thieves in your house, I believe regret and sin of the past is probably one of the number one reasons. And maybe I'm wrong, but that would be part of my why, and also just doubting myself. Can you speak to that with those that are listening? We just have a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to have you back again. Will you promise to come back? Because I just think we have to unpack even more. But Oh, it's
I will
so
be
good.
back as often as you want.
Yay.
I will make myself available as much as you want.
Oh,
Regret is one of the great lies of Satan. I will tell you,
yes.
there's nothing, it feels right because you're feeling like you're being accountable for your actions. But the great reality of accountability is not feeling bad about the past, but moving forward. One of the
Mhm.
greatest things that a parent can give to a child is not regretting over what they did, but to demonstrate to them, you know something? We can mess up and move forward.
Right, right, right.
There's no greater lesson. You know, it's life is purely the experience. That's why I love the book of Acts. The book of Acts was the church
Mm,
feeling their way along. Jesus wasn't there to give them the step-by-step instructions anymore. He was in
mhm,
heaven and they had to figure out what to do in every chapter. And it's
mm,
just like when I practiced law, the one thing I knew was 3 years of law school did not prepare me for the first day of practicing law.
mm.
They
Wow.
I had to go out and I had to figure it out. I had to figure out what to do in a courtroom, and sometimes I looked like an idiot.
Mm.
But you know something? You figured things out and you move forward. And at the end of the day, you learned what you could do, and you
Right.
many times surprised yourself because you find out. You know something? There is more. We have more life to live. I remember I studied counseling and psychology both on the undergraduate and graduate level, and one of my professors used to always say, he used to talk about what was a common statement that we use 10% of our brain, and actually he said I think that's overstating. And one of the great things I try to suggest to people is why not take a chance on moving forward? Why not take a
Hmm.
chance in discovering? Because life is in the discovery.
Yes.
It is in
Yes.
finding out what we can do that we haven't been doing yet.
Mm.
And
That is so good.
and the discovery of what God has around the corner if we're just willing to take that step.
Absolutely. You know, before I
The
end, I
people
just
we'll
want to.
meet, I'm sorry.
No, no, it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's what I.
I was going to say
No,
the
we've
people
got a
we
little.
meet and just like you, I loved our meeting and it was so
Aw,
exciting.
thank you.
It was one of the greatest drives to an airport I could ever hope to have.
Well, thank you very much. That is quite the crown to wear. I'd rather wear that crown than any of the others I've worn over the younger years, non-Jesus in my life. Can I just circle back to about the regret? A lot of
Sure.
my viewers, of course, when you first start something, you get your mother and every friend to sign up. Those are my subscribers. But for anyone that is stumbling upon this show later on, they might not know that what turned my life around was my greatest regret. And yet, what I say is, I will always regret making the decision, but I don't live under the shame because of the cross. And so we can have regrets, but at the same time, not let them be an excuse, like you've said, because God can cover that and you can learn from them. So to have that weight, and for me, and again, I'm just going to touch on it and not go into the details right now, but in 1993, I had an abortion. And now you can imagine, as a young girl that had given her heart to Jesus and thought she was a Christian, she finds herself in a situation where I make a decision. And again, another show I'll go into more detail. But for now, living under that regret and shame before Christ allowed me to receive his grace and forgiveness. If I was where I was before I met Jesus, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. If I didn't know that it could be used to maybe help someone else, but God still loved me despite. So it's something we might regret, but most of the things you do learn from that. And I think that's a great thing. So if it's a serious thing like what I did, maybe a little different, but do you agree with the way I'm looking at that? I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you know something? Our worst experiences, our biggest mistakes are actually a point of connection with other people. No
Mm,
one could identify with a perfect person. We
no.
identify with people who have the same weaknesses that we have, and yet those weaknesses did not stop them. I love Paul's
Mm,
statement where he says, because of all that God has done for me, I persuade men. And
So
that
good.
becomes so it becomes not a moment where we shut down, but motivational, to where we
Right.
say, you
Right.
know something, I am going to take this and go further than I would have if I hadn't
Hmm.
gone through that mistake. And so your worst thing actually becomes your best thing.
Mm. Oh, praise God. You know what? That's probably a great place to end for today so that I just make sure that you have to come back because I didn't even get on to my other questions. But I just want to say thank you. I absolutely love your precious wife, Leslie. And we both know we're going to see each other before too long. And I have promised that I will bring my sugar cookie recipe that my grandmother left when she went to heaven. And I will make you a batch. Maybe I'll make you a separate batch so that you can sneak yours away. But that is my thank you, to say thank you for taking me to the airport with all my luggage, which was a lot. Poor guy. I didn't even think you'd actually be able to lift it for me because it was crazy. Not that you're not strong, but I mean it was a lot. But how God orchestrated that trip, and it was one of my best trips to an airport too. So we're even there. So anyway, I just want to pray over you, if you don't mind. Let's just close in prayer. And for those that are watching, even if you're uncomfortable with prayer, just soak it in, because we want to speak life into your life. And we know that our source is Christ, and he is the one you can trust. And in today's world, when there's so many voices going on, you want to hear something that you know is solid. So Lord, I thank you for Mark, and I thank you, God, for his obedience to not only close down his practice, but transition to a place that he had been called long before. You allowed him to step out in faith. You then, made the orchestrating of his steps, or you orchestrated his steps to cross so that he could have this book for me to hold in hand and for others to touch and to glean from his experience and the wisdom you've given him. And so, Father, I pray right now that you will continue to guide both himself as well as Leslie, and that their church will just be a blessing in the community of Los Angeles, and that everywhere he goes, his steps are ordained by you. I thank you, God, for this precious man. I am blessed, Lord, to know him, and I am just so grateful that he could be on our show in the first few episodes and to start it off right. It's never too early, and it's never too late if we follow you. So in Jesus' name, I pray a blessing again. Amen. Thank you, Mark. You
Amen.
are so wonderful. And yes, you will be back for sure. And I just say have a great rest of your evening, whatever you're doing, and we will see you soon. All right, so back to everybody else. I am so grateful that you've tuned in. I'm excited that we've had a good couple of weeks of shows, and so many of you have given us great feedback, and I appreciate that. And I don't take it for granted, because when he talks about stepping out in fear, I legitimately said to some friends, I might have 10 followers. I don't know. But you know what? We do it for the one. And maybe you're the one. The Bible talks about the 99, and that the shepherd left the 99 and he went for the one. And maybe you're someone that doesn't know Jesus. Maybe you think it's some religious craziness and what's it all about? Well, I'm here to tell you that I have been serving and loving the Lord for over 30 years. And I know that nothing ever made sense to me, or did I feel the peace of God and know my identity, until I got to know Jesus and what the Word of God says about me, and he also says it about you. So I hope you'll join us again, but until the next time, for Talking with Tressa, have a blessed morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, wherever you are, and I hope to see you again. So take care.